The rain came down in relentless sheets, hammering the pavement like 1,000 tiny fists. The wind howled through the empty streets, dragging the bitter chill of the storm with it. But amidst the chaos there was a figure, small, soaked, and trembling in the corner of a dark alley. His fur, once a warm brown, was now matted with dirt and drenched to the bone. A stray forgotten by the world, fighting against the storm that mirrored his own life. The dog's eyes, wide, searching, scanned the rain-soaked horizon, his heart thundering in his chest as the storm raged on. He had no place to call home, no one to turn to. And yet, there he was, enduring, surviving. His name was Charlie, but the world had forgotten that long ago. Through the downpour, Charlie limped toward the corner, his body aching with exhaustion, but his spirit undeterred. He didn't know what he was looking for. Perhaps just shelter, perhaps just someone to notice him. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a woman. Her face was pale, her hair clinging to her cheeks. But her eyes, they were a reflection of his own struggle. She stepped closer, her movements tentative yet purposeful, drawn to this lost creature in the storm. There was something in the way she looked at him, something that made the world feel less cold, less empty. Her hand stretched toward him slowly, almost as if she were afraid he might flinch away. But Charlie didn't. He couldn't. Because in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The world was dark, except for the flash of lightning that split the sky, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. The city was lost in the storm, streets flooded, windows shut tight, and the faint glow of streetlights barely cutting through the rain. Among the shadows of the alleyways, a dog stumbled forward. His legs wobbled, muscles sore from days of hunger and exhaustion. His name was Charlie, but the world had forgotten it long ago. Now, he was nothing but a stray, a creature of the night, lost in a storm that felt like it would never end. The water pooled around his paws, seeping into the fur on his legs. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The cold gnawed at him, the wind biting into his skin, but he pushed forward, seeking something, anything, to hold on to. The world around him was a blur of grey, but in his heart there was a flicker of hope. He had been alone for so long, but this storm felt different. It wasn't just the rain. It was something more. A woman stood in the distance, her figure barely visible against the downpour. Sarah. She had her hood pulled up, but her eyes, they were open, scanning the street, lost in a search of her own. She had been running too, but not from the rain. She was running from the past. From the choices she'd made. From the man who had broken her heart and left her broken in the world. As she passed the alley, her eyes caught sight of Charlie, standing there, soaked to the bone, shaking with fear. Something in her chest tightened, and without thinking, she stepped toward him. The door creaked as Sarah pushed it open, ushering Charlie inside. The warmth of the room contrasted with the biting cold outside. Charlie hesitated, his body rigid, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar surroundings. The flickering light of the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the soft scent of something cooking wafted through the air. But it wasn't the food that made Charlie's stomach tighten, it was the feeling of safety. It was foreign, unfamiliar. Sarah knelt down, her hand extended slowly toward him. She had learned over the years that love couldn't be rushed. It had to be earned. She waited, her heart racing in her chest, as Charlie took a tentative step forward. He sniffed the air, his senses alert, and then, with a soft whine, he lowered his head and allowed her to touch him. A flicker of trust. That was all it took. Charlie began to settle in. The sound of Sarah's voice, soft and soothing, became a comfort he never knew he needed. But there were still moments when he recoiled, moments when the shadows of his past came rushing back. His body trembled as memories of abuse, neglect, and loss flooded his mind. He couldn't stay still. He couldn't relax. Sarah watched him, her heart breaking as she saw the scars he carried. She knew all too well what it was like to hide behind walls, to protect herself from the world. She had done it for years. And yet, as she watched Charlie, this broken creature who had been abandoned just like her, she felt something stir within her. A desire to heal him, to give him the love and care he deserved. One evening, the storm returned. Not the rain, but a shadow from Charlie's past. The sound of barking echoed in the distance, and Charlie's body went rigid, his eyes wide with terror. He knew that voice. It was the same one that had haunted him, that had driven him to the streets. The world around him shifted. He was back in the storm. But this time, he wasn't alone. Sarah stood beside him, her hand on his back, offering him comfort. "I'm here," she whispered. "I won't let them hurt you." The storm outside howled, but inside there was only calm. When the storm passed, the world felt different. The sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden hue over the room. Charlie lay at Sarah's feet, his head resting on her lap. They were both broken, but they had found each other. And in each other they had found the strength to keep going. The world outside had changed, and so had they. Together, they had survived the storm. Charlie's eyes closed, his breathing steady. And as the warmth of the sunlight washed over them both, Sarah whispered softly, "You're home now." And in that moment, everything was right. Charlie's paws were heavy, dragging through the floodwater that swirled around him like a river, the rain slashing his face like knives. He limped forward, moving in the shadows, the wind biting into him with cruel precision. Each step was an effort, but the fear of being seen, of being rejected again, pushed him forward. He didn't know where he was going. He never had. The world had turned its back on him long ago, leaving him alone in the cold, alone in the dark. But there was something in the air tonight. The storm wasn't just a storm. It was more like the weight of his past coming to meet him. The years of abuse, the nights spent alone, hungry, forgotten. It all surged through him, flooding his mind and his heart, a sharp, painful ache that twisted deeper with every passing moment. His ears perked as he heard something. A sound, soft and unfamiliar, cutting through the noise of the storm. A voice, or maybe it was just the wind. But no, it was a real voice, the echo of a soft, comforting call. His eyes widened as he caught sight of her, the woman emerging from the rain, her figure hazy like a dream. He stood frozen for a moment, caught between the fear of reaching out and the desperate hope that had been buried deep inside him for so long. Sarah stepped closer, her feet sinking slightly in the water. Her eyes were filled with something unfamiliar, something that made Charlie's heart flutter painfully in his chest. She didn't hesitate. Her hand reached out slowly, trembling slightly in the chill, but firm with purpose. She looked at him with a softness that no one had ever shown him before, and the world suddenly felt a little less cold. For a moment, time stood still. The rain kept falling and the storm raged on, but everything else seemed to fade into the background. It was just him and her. Two souls, equally lost, yet inexplicably drawn together in the eye of the storm. Charlie took a cautious step forward, his eyes locked on hers, a silent understanding passing between them. Days passed since Charlie had first stepped into Sarah's life, his world shifting in ways he couldn't have predicted. He was no longer alone in the streets, no longer bound by hunger and fear. Sarah's home, a small, cozy apartment on the edge of town, became his sanctuary. The warmth of the fireplace, the soft cushions on the couch, and the scent of fresh food. It was all so new to him, so unfamiliar. But for once there was no pain, no hunger gnawing at his insides. Still, Charlie held back. He had been hurt before, abandoned and rejected too many times to fully believe that someone could care for him. He watched Sarah from the corner of the room, her gentle hands placing food in his bowl, her voice calm as she spoke to him, trying to coax him into trust. But trust was a fragile thing. For Charlie, it was something he had to relearn. Sarah was patient, always speaking softly, her eyes filled with an understanding he couldn't quite grasp. She never forced him to approach her, never tried to take him too far outside his comfort zone. She let him take his time. And slowly, bit by bit, the walls Charlie had built around himself began to crumble. One evening, as Sarah sat on the couch, Charlie crawled closer. His body tensed with hesitation, but there was something different in the air. Something warm, something safe. As he inched closer, Sarah's hand moved toward him, slow and steady. She didn't rush him. She waited for him to come to her, and he did. Tentatively, cautiously, he placed his head on her lap, his body shaking slightly. But the shaking wasn't from fear anymore. It was from something else, something raw, something vulnerable that Charlie had been holding back for so long. Sarah's hand gently brushed through his matted fur, and Charlie closed his eyes, letting out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. For the first time in a long while, he felt something close to peace. As the days turned into weeks, Charlie's transformation was both subtle and profound. His coat began to shine with a newfound softness, the hunger in his eyes fading into a quiet contentment. He followed Sarah around the house now, curious, less afraid. He began to recognize the rhythm of her days, the sound of her footsteps as she moved through the apartment, the way she would hum to herself as she made dinner. Each small moment became something that Charlie cherished, even if he couldn't fully understand it. But with this newfound peace came the weight of the past, always lurking just below the surface. There were nights when Charlie would bolt awake, his body stiff with fear, his breathing erratic as though he had relived something in his sleep. His past, the years of betrayal and loneliness, still haunted him, and it would take more than kindness to erase the scars. One evening, after a particularly vivid nightmare, Charlie retreated to the corner of the room, his eyes wild with panic. Sarah noticed immediately. She approached him slowly, her voice soft, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't ask him to come to her. Instead, she sat down on the floor beside him, just within reach, and waited. For a long while, they sat in silence, Sarah's presence a quiet reassurance in the darkness. She didn't rush him. She didn't try to fix him. She just let him be, and slowly over time, Charlie began to trust her more. The panic in his chest would subside, and his trembling body would relax, if only a little. The road to healing was long, but Sarah was there every step of the way. And each day, Charlie grew stronger, more trusting, and more willing to love again. One rainy afternoon, the world shifted again. Charlie's eyes locked on the window as a figure passed by. A man. A man who looked like he belonged to Charlie's past, someone he thought he'd never see again. The man's voice was muffled by the storm, but Charlie recognized it immediately. The same voice that had once yelled at him, kicked him, and sent him running into the streets. Fear gripped Charlie's chest like a vice. He wanted to run, to hide. The memories were flooding back. The pain, the betrayal, the feeling of being nothing more than an object to be discarded. But Sarah was there. She was the anchor that kept him grounded. She was the reason he didn't run. "Charlie!" Sarah whispered softly, crouching down beside him. "I'm here. I won't let him hurt you." But Charlie wasn't so sure. His body trembled as the man's figure loomed closer. He barked warning, but the fear was too much. Before Sarah could stop him, Charlie ran toward the door, his heart racing. But Sarah wasn't far behind. She called his name, but he didn't listen. His body surged forward, driven by the instinct to escape. The world outside was chaos, but Sarah was there, chasing after him, her voice a lifeline in the storm. Just as the man reached out for Charlie, Sarah was there, standing between them. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She just stood tall, unwavering. The man stopped in his tracks, unsure of what to do next. "Leave him alone, Sarah," said her voice calm but firm. "He's not your problem anymore." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a final, defeated look, the man turned away and left. Charlie stood frozen, his chest heaving. But Sarah was right there, her hand on his back, grounding him in the moment. Together, they faced the storm, both of them stronger for having faced it head-on. The storm finally passed. The clouds parted, and sunlight began to filter through the window, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. Charlie lay at Sarah's feet, his head resting against her leg. They had survived the storm, both of them changed in ways they never could have imagined. As Sarah gently stroked his fur, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were no longer alone, neither of them. They had found each other in the darkness, and now, as the light poured into their world, they could finally heal. Charlie's eyes fluttered closed, his body relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. And as Sarah looked down at him, she knew. They were home now, both of them, together. And in that silence, she whispered softly, "You're safe, Charlie. You're home." The world was no longer a storm. It was a place where they could finally breathe. The world outside seemed indifferent to the storm that pounded the streets. Lightning slashed through the sky, followed by the deafening roar of thunder that rattled the windows. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth, blending together in a raw, almost suffocating embrace. Amidst the fury of the storm, Charlie, a scrappy brown dog, wandered the empty, flooded streets. His fur clung to his thin body, matted and drenched from the ceaseless downpour. His paws dragged through the puddles, every step harder than the last. He had been alone for what felt like forever, his small, broken body carrying the weight of all his suffering. His ribs jutted out from under his fur, a constant reminder of the starvation he had endured. He had seen so many people pass by, too absorbed in their own lives to spare a glance at him. A creature barely clinging to life. The wind whipped against his face, the droplets stinging like needles. Yet, he didn't stop moving, he couldn't. The need to survive burned in his chest, stronger than any cold or fear. Charlie's eyes scanned the streets, but there was no shelter, no warmth to be found. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stand still. The storm echoed in his soul, a reflection of the storm within him. His past, filled with pain and abandonment, surged through him, drowning him in memories he couldn't escape. But then something shifted. In the distance, he saw a figure, a woman. She stood at the edge of an alley, staring at him with soft eyes, a warmth in her gaze that he couldn't understand. She was alone too, but in that moment, her loneliness seemed to echo his own. For a long moment, their eyes locked, a silent connection that neither could explain. Charlie hesitated, unsure of her intentions. But something told him he couldn't turn away. Slowly, he limped forward, his heart pounding in his chest as she took a cautious step toward him. Her hand reached out, trembling but steady, and in that fleeting second, Charlie made a choice. He stepped forward, drawn to her warmth. And when her fingers brushed the top of his head, something in him finally broke. The walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. The warmth of Sarah's apartment contrasted sharply with the harsh cold that Charlie had known for so long. The soft glow of the lamps, the crackling of the fire in the hearth. It was all so unfamiliar, so overwhelming. Charlie couldn't remember the last time he had been inside a home, let alone one that felt safe. He lay on the floor, watching Sarah as she moved about, her actions calm and deliberate. She had made him food, something warm and comforting. But Charlie hesitated, sniffing the air but not yet reaching for it. He didn't know how to trust. He had been hurt too many times before. The touch of a hand, the kindness of a voice, it all felt too good to be true. Sarah, however, never pushed him. She simply spoke to him softly, her voice a gentle balm against the rough edges of his pain. "It's okay, Charlie," she said, sitting across from him, her eyes filled with patience and understanding. "You can take your time." There was something in her tone, something that made him want to believe her. Slowly, Charlie approached the bowl of food she had set down for him. The hunger was gnawing at his insides, and his instincts kicked in. He lowered his head, gingerly taking a few small bites. Sarah watched him, her eyes never leaving him. In that moment, Charlie realized that this wasn't like the other times. He wasn't being fed out of pity or obligation. This was different. She was feeding him because she cared. The food was warm, and it filled him in ways he hadn't expected. But more than that, it filled a part of him he hadn't even known was empty. A flicker of hope sparked within him, faint but real. It was the first time in so long that he felt as though he could stay, that he could belong. Over the next few days, Sarah and Charlie began to settle into a quiet rhythm. She would go to work, and Charlie would wait for her, exploring the house in his own time. He would follow her from room to room, his eyes constantly watching her. He began to learn her routines. The sound of her footsteps on the wooden floors, the way she hummed when she cooked, the way she would softly call out to him when she needed him to move from the door. But despite the growing sense of peace, there was a part of Charlie that still recoiled. His past haunted him, and every night, when Sarah was asleep, he would close his eyes and see flashes of the life he had left behind. The cold streets, the cruel hands, the hunger, they were all still there, lurking just beneath the surface. One evening, Charlie bolted upright in his sleep, his chest heaving with fear. He was back on the streets, running from something he couldn't see. His body trembled as memories surged forward, and his heart raced in panic. He wanted to run, to escape, but he couldn't. Sarah woke at the sound of his frantic breathing. She immediately sat up, reaching out for him. "Charlie," she said softly, her voice steady. "You're safe. You're with me now." At first, Charlie pulled back, the terror still gripping him. But Sarah didn't move. She didn't try to force him. She simply stayed by his side, her hand resting lightly on his back, offering a silent comfort. Slowly, the tremors in his body began to fade. The panic ebbed away. He didn't know how, but he believed her. He had to. And when the night passed and the world was quiet again, Charlie curled up beside her, his body finally at ease. For the first time, he didn't feel so alone. One crisp morning, just as the sun was rising, Charlie's body went tense again. He could feel it. The presence of someone from his past. The hairs on his neck stood up as his eyes darted to the door, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. He heard the sound of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, a rhythmic echo that sent a wave of panic through him. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming softly, unaware of the storm brewing inside Charlie. He couldn't let it happen again. The memories, the abuse, the betrayal, they rushed in like a flood. His body reacted before he could stop it, and he bolted for the door, his legs carrying him out into the cold morning air. He didn't look back, but Sarah was right behind him, her voice calling his name, firm but gentle. "Charlie, wait." She reached him just as he reached the street, his eyes wild with fear. The figure that had triggered his panic stood before him. The man who had once been his tormentor. The one who had thrown him out, beaten him, and left him to fend for himself. Charlie. The man sneered, reaching out for him, but Sarah stepped in front of him, blocking the man's path. Her posture was unwavering, her voice calm but resolute. "He's not your problem anymore." The man's eyes flickered with a mix of anger and confusion, but he didn't move. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the distance. Charlie stood still, trembling, but as Sarah's hand rested on his back, he realized something. He was free. For the first time in his life, he was free. The storm had passed, and the world was bathed in the soft glow of morning light. Sarah stood by the window, watching the sunlight break through the clouds, casting a warm golden hue over everything. The rain had stopped, the world now quiet and still. Charlie lay at her feet, his head resting gently on her lap. His breathing was steady, calm. He was no longer the broken, terrified dog who had wandered through the streets. He had found a place, a home where love and care were no longer foreign concepts. The world outside was peaceful now, a new day beginning, and for the first time in so long, Charlie felt safe. He had found something he hadn't known he needed, a person who saw him, who understood his pain, and who gave him a chance to heal. Sarah looked down at him, her fingers gently stroking his fur. "We're home now, Charlie," she whispered softly. "We're safe." And for the first time, Charlie believed her. Charlie's world had always been shrouded in darkness, but tonight it felt like the storm had swallowed the very last sliver of light. The rain was relentless, hammering against the streets with a ferocity that seemed almost personal. Each droplet hit the ground like a bullet, leaving small puddles that rippled with every gust of wind. But Charlie didn't care about the rain. It had become a constant companion, a reminder of the harshness he had grown used to. His body was sore from days of wandering, each step a reminder of the life he had been forced to live, one of rejection and solitude. His fur, once a soft shade of brown, was now matted with the grime of the streets, wet and heavy with the relentless downpour. He had no idea where he was going, just that he had to keep moving. The storm, with its deafening thunder and blinding flashes of lightning, was the only thing that seemed to mirror the chaos inside him. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that the fear of stopping, of being alone, was more terrifying than the storm itself. The city around him was empty, the only sounds the roar of the wind and the distant hum of a broken street lamp. But then, through the haze of rain, something changed. A figure appeared in the distance, barely visible against the downpour, but enough for Charlie's instincts to kick in. It was a woman, alone like him. Her presence seemed to cut through the storm, drawing him toward her. She wasn't just another Perserbi. She was something different, something he hadn't felt in years. Her eyes met his, and in that brief moment, he saw something he hadn't expected: warmth, It was strange, almost foreign to him, but it was undeniable. Her gaze wasn't one of pity or indifference. It was the look of someone who had been where he was. Her face was soft, but there was something fierce in the way she held herself, as if she knew the world's cruelties and was willing to face them. Charlie, his heart pounding, took a step forward, drawn to her presence as though she was the one thing in this storm that could save him. The rain lashed at his face, but he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. And then, slowly, cautiously, she extended her hand toward him. A simple gesture, but one that sent a ripple of hope through him. For the first time in years, Charlie didn't feel alone. He didn't feel like he was just a stray dog, a forgotten creature in a world that never wanted him. He felt seen. Sarah's apartment was small but cozy, a place that seemed to hold warmth even against the chill of the storm outside. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh bread, a smell that made Charlie's stomach growl in an unfamiliar way. It was almost too much for him. The soft lighting, the clean floors, the calm atmosphere. It felt like a world he had no place in, a world that had forgotten him long ago. He curled up by the door, watching Sarah as she moved around the apartment. She had given him a soft bed to lie on, a bowl of food, and a gentle touch that he couldn't quite understand. He was afraid to accept it fully, afraid that it would be taken away just like everything else. But as she sat on the couch and smiled at him, something in him couldn't help but respond. She wasn't pushing him to come closer, but her presence was a beacon in the stillness of the room. Slowly, Charlie got to his feet, his legs still shaky, and took a tentative step toward her. He sniffed the air, unsure whether to trust this new world or retreat back to the darkness he knew. But Sarah's eyes were soft, not demanding. Just a quiet invitation to let go, to trust. He walked a little closer and then a little closer still, until he found himself by her feet, his body trembling slightly. It wasn't fear this time. It was something else. Something warm, something that made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar longing. Sarah didn't move. She just reached out a hand, placing it gently on his back. He flinched just slightly, but then something inside him told him to stay, to let her in, and so he did. Charlie lowered his head, his eyes closing as he let out a soft, relieved sigh. He wasn't sure when the storm inside him began to calm, but it had. Slowly, quietly, in the gentle rhythm of Sarah's touch. The days passed in a blur of warmth and light. Sarah's routine became Charlie's as well. He followed her around the apartment, watching her every movement, learning the little things that made her who she was. The way she hummed softly as she cleaned, the way her voice would soften when she spoke to him. But Charlie wasn't entirely free from his past. He had moments where the fear would rise up in him, unexpected and overpowering. He would retreat to the far corners of the apartment, his body stiff with anxiety, eyes wide with panic. The memories of his past would resurface. The hunger, the cold, the cruel hands that had pushed him into the streets. They were always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to break through. Sarah saw these moments, but she didn't push. She just sat with him, letting him come to her when he was ready. Her patience was like a balm to the wounds he had carried for so long. And slowly, over time, Charlie began to trust her more. To trust this strange new life she was offering him. One evening, after a particularly unsettling dream, Charlie woke in a panic, his heart racing. He was back on the streets, running from something he couldn't see. His breathing was shallow, his body trembling. But Sarah was there, sitting beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. Her presence was enough to anchor him to the present, enough to pull him out of the storm inside his mind. "It's okay, Charlie," Sarah whispered softly. "You're safe here. You're home now?" The words were simple, but they held a power he couldn't ignore. For the first time in his life, he let go of the fear that had haunted him for so long, and in that quiet moment, Charlie began to heal. The world outside had grown quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a crisp, cool morning. But for Charlie, the peace was fleeting. There was a noise outside the door, a voice, a familiar one. The panic surged through him like wildfire. His heart hammered in his chest as the memories came rushing back, flooding him with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. He bolted from his resting place, his legs shaky but driven by fear, by the instinct to escape. He darted toward the door, his body trembling. Sarah was in the other room, unaware of the danger approaching. She had been working, humming softly to herself. But when she heard Charlie's frantic barking, she immediately rushed to him, calling his name. Charlie didn't respond. He was fixated on the door, his body tense with the fear of what was on the other side. And then the door swung open. The man stood there, the same one who had hurt him before, the one who had discarded him without a second thought. Charlie froze, his eyes wide with terror. The world narrowed to just this moment. The past had come rushing back to claim him. But Sarah was there, stepping in front of him, her body blocking the door. She stood tall, her voice calm but firm. "Leave him alone," she said, her eyes unwavering. "He's not yours to hurt anymore." The man hesitated, his eyes flickering between Sarah and Charlie. For a moment, it seemed as though the world itself was holding its breath. But then, without a word, the man turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the distance. Charlie stood still, his body trembling with relief. Sarah turned to him, her hands resting on his back. "It's okay now, Charlie," she whispered. "You're safe." The storm had passed. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. Charlie lay by Sarah's feet, his body calm, his breathing steady. He had survived the storm, the one that raged inside him and the one that had once threatened to swallow him whole. Sarah stroked his fur gently, her fingers brushing over the spots where the scars of his past still lingered. But in that moment, there were no more fears, no more pain. Only the quiet peace that came with being home. Charlie's eyes fluttered closed, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his journey lift. He had found something he never thought he would. A place where he was wanted, a place where love could heal him. And as Sarah looked down at him, she whispered softly, "You're home now, Charlie." And in the quiet of the room, as the sunlight bathed them both, he finally believed it. He was home.